What does that mean when we go back to
Yeah.
this isolated world where we're more local cultures and local foods, et cetera? So most people haven't really thought through that. We're already starting to see that. So in Europe, like Norway's banned exporting of electricity, Bulgaria's banned exporting of firewood, India's banned exporting of rice. The US is now competing for oil and natural gas from Europe. So the US is running through a diesel shortage. There was a shipment of diesel going to the UK, and the US traders outbid it and diverted the shipment back to the US.
And Venezuela is now potentially an ally. I thought.
Venezuela's so far gone. I don't think Venezuela.
Was it John Kerry who was with Maduro?
Yes.
And they're talking. There's a lot of oil there.
There's a lot of oil there.
Venezuelans cannot afford to mine.
Yeah, I just did a show with Josh Young from Bison Interest. He's a big energy guy, and we went through each country's oil and what that looks like, and Venezuela's gone. Like Venezuela won't, maybe in a decade. Oil takes a long time to come online, right? It takes 7 to 10 years. So like maybe in a decade, but like most likely not.
But I just thought it was interesting. John Kerry was shaking hands with Maduro.
Yeah. So then we have, OPEC, potentially with OPEC fighting against the Fed. So the Fed sees that there's inflation caused by energy, and there's two ways to cure high prices. One, bring on more supply, or two, crush demand. So the Fed says, well, we'll crush demand. And so then OPEC's like, well, then we'll just pump less oil. Like, we can play this game longer than you can. Mm-hmm. So we have that situation. And of course, if OPEC and Saudi Arabia goes with the BRICS nations, which it looks like they're going to, then the whole world breaks apart. We have the whole Iran-Argentina situation going with them as well. And then we have the sovereign debt bubbles bursting. So in Japan, the UK, all these countries, because energy prices have got so high now, they're being forced to sell treasuries in order to buy and import oil and energy. And so all of this basically just leads, and the EU has this fragmentation tool they're doing now, which is basically, let's just take from the rich countries and give to the poor countries, which is going to make this problem worse. So all of that leads to this
Sovereign
whole world breaking
communism.
down. Yeah, this whole world lead to it blowing off. I think there's three main trends that I'm tracking. And I think if you look back in markets, you have secular markets, long-term secular markets. And within a long-term secular, think like the Dow or the S&P 500 from 2008 to 2022, a long-term secular trend. And then you have cyclical downturns within a long-term secular trend. So if you look at a long-term secular trend, there's been three trends. One has been globalization. So we've increased peace, we've increased global trade, right? So we've increased the population. And three, we've increased the money supply.
And all three are reversing.
So if you double the population and 80x the money supply and increase the global cooperation and trade, what happens? Well, massive progress, massive deflation. We took $100,000 jobs, we sent them to India for $8,000, $100 parts, get them made in Asia for $8. Massive deflation, which allows for massive monetary increase. But when you have depopulation or population decline, and you have deglobalization, how does the central banks create money in an inflationary environment? The answer is they don't. So when you decrease the population and you decrease the money supply and you decrease global trade,
progress will slow.
So what does that look like? I don't know if we have time to dig through all that now.
I mean, let's have a go.
I mean, we can run through it really quickly. So you said that you're kind of a fan of thinking about smaller nation states and cultures within that. And that sounds great. And I am too. That's a populist thing or whatever. And that's great. And I love cultures and I love to go to different places and see different cultures.
Yeah.
But what does that really mean? So we haven't really thought through that. So for example, I have my iPhone right here. In order to make this thing, we need parts from 6 different continents. So if we can't have peace and global trade between 6 continents, then how do we get an iPhone? Ford cars are made in 60 countries. There's 4,400 manufacturing sites over 60 countries to make a car. How does that work? People haven't really thought through what this means, I don't think.
Well, somebody also did say on the show recently that said nations that trade with each other don't go to war with each other.
Usually because there's 2 ways to get wealth.
Yeah.
Cooperation or theft and coercion. And so if we're cooperating together, we have a good relationship. Why would we go to war with each other? And so what's happened is in order to get our cars, in order to get our iPhones, we have this global cooperation. And what's happened is, and then we can even get into food. Food is probably the biggest problem that we have, because what's happened is all these nations that have been coming online, most of Asia, not just, it was China, but now it's like Thailand and Indonesia and Bali, et cetera. Any nation that had a port could instantly take their poor population and start manufacturing wire harnesses, like basic components, and start exporting them, and they could automatically create wealth. And then also countries that could produce wheat. Wheat was the staple that kept people alive for millennia. It's not the highest and best use of their land. So now Holland could be the dairy capital, as could New Zealand, right? So that's their highest and best use. So they'll export what is the highest and best use, and they'll import what they need. Well, what happens when they can't import what they need anymore?
Stop exporting.
Stop exporting. Now they have to grow, instead of their highest and best use, they have to grow wheat again. So how does that change the situation, right? So I think the biggest things, I think, so if we look at that, I took some notes just on the food aspect of it. So like a couple problems. One, if we look at agriculture. So if you go to your grocery store, most of that food isn't grown in your local area or even your country. And so it's grown in all these other countries that are specializing in that. But what about the agricultural equipment required to even grow that food? We're talking about massive tractors and earth movers. Those can't be shipped. Those have to be manufactured in country.
Okay, so when you talk about deglobalization, are we talking about this is going to be the impact of deglobalization, or can deglobalization work if we maintain cooperation? But are you fearing that there won't be cooperation, and therefore we're going to see a breakdown of all these?
I'm fearing there's not going to be a cooperation, and we're going to see a breakdown of it.
Which will lead to...
And we're already seeing it, right? Where India's already banned exports of rice, Bulgaria's already banned exports, Sweden's already banned exports. We're already seeing it. The U.S. just outcompeted Europe for diesel. And so I think we're going to continue to see less cooperation and more competition.
And is that market dependent? Like, so that makes sense in kind of energy and food, but in kind of like manufacturing, industrial manufacturing, would you have the same protectionism?
Do you think the U.S. is going to go back and do business with Russia right now?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment.
Yeah.
What about the CHIPS Act or the bill that the Biden administration just put on China, where we just shut down their entire high tech industry? You know about that?
Is that where like a bunch of people just basically quit?
Yeah, but do you know why they quit? So there's basically 3 levels of microchips. Mm-hmm. So there's low tech, mid tech, and high tech.
They took out all the
second and third tier microchips out of China, and not only did they
took out the expertise.
One, they did 3 things. One, China's not allowed to have chips anymore at all. Period. 2, China's not allowed to have any people that know how to work on chips, which is why they resigned. And 3, China's not even allowed to have any equipment that could.
Why? Why is this a policy?
Why?
Yeah, why?
I don't, to handicap, to knock them at their knees, to take them out, to send them back to the dark ages, obviously.
But doesn't that increase the risk of them invading Taiwan, who manufactures chips?
Well, but it doesn't really. So back to this global cooperation, right? So Taiwan makes the chips, right? But where do they actually get the equipment from? Where do they get the designs from? Where do they get the supplies from? So the silica sand that makes up the chips, 85% of it comes from North Carolina.
Hold on. So how are the chips that Tesla require from their gigafactory in China, where do they get those from?
Well, they're not going to get them anymore.
Can we look this one up?
Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, remember the whole world is connected. Like people haven't really thought through how big this connects things. So for example,
I think they did COVID when all the supply chains broke down.
I know, but like to build a Tesla car, you need a microchip.
Yeah.
Okay. So the microchip comes from Taiwan.
Yeah.
But where do the parts come for the microchip?
Take a minute. Okay, the US have taken unprecedented steps to limit the sale of advanced computer chips to China, escalating efforts to contain Beijing's tech and military ambitions. The moves are designed to cut off supplies of critical technology to China that may be used across sectors, including advanced computing and weapons manufacture. Keep going. China consumes more than 3/4 of the semiconductors sold globally, but produces only 15% of the. So you can still produce. Oh,
Yeah, but
this is so. China Semiconductor Industry Association said in a statement that it hoped the U.S. government would reverse its decision and return to international trade negotiation. Okay, and we've just had Biden meet Xi Jinping. So,
my guess is it's like, hey, Xi Jinping, you're not helping us with Russia. We've sanctioned them, but you're buying all their exports. So you want ships back? How about you jump on board with us with Russia?
Okay, which they might do.
Right. So I'm guessing it's a bargaining chip.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. Yeah.
But as of right now, they're dead in the water. Now the article, your 2 seconds of reading didn't really catch up on the whole situation. There's 3 levels of microchips. So China is able to make like tier 1 microchips, which are made for like alarm clocks. Okay. No tier 2 or no tier 3, no thermostats, no computers, certainly no iPhones. They can't make any of that.
They've whacked their ankles with a sledgehammer.
With a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
So it's probably a bargaining chip. But what if China says, no, we're going to continue to be with the BRICS and we're going to continue to get food and energy with them?
So these are just basically power games.
It's power games. Yeah. And I believe it's only going to escalate and we're going to continue to see a breakdown of that. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah, where does this lead?
Well, so China has to import 70% of their oil, 85% of all their energy is imported. China has no arable land. Most of China is a desert. They can't grow their food. They don't have their own energy. They don't have water. Any water because it's a desert, any water they do have has been completely contaminated. And they're manufacturing, but they can't buy their own products.
And the population shrinking?
And well, then there's the demographics. We can get to that as well.
China sounds fucked.
They are. So within 25 years, half of their population will be gone.
Have you seen the footage that's come out recently of protests against the COVID restrictions and barriers? Like basically they've been trampling down.
In China?
Yeah, revolution stuff. Yeah. And you've seen actual protests in China now.
A couple little things here and there that don't get scrubbed real quick.
I wonder if it's a seed and we will see some kind of revolution in China.
Well, China is going to break apart. Most likely we'll go back to remember, what we know as the world has been here for 80 years.
Yeah.
China has a long history, but mostly of dynasties.
Yeah.
And so China will probably break apart back into some smaller dynasties. So just on pure numbers alone, that's what
you want though.
It's not
that's like localism.
Yeah. I think that's a better way, but I think peace and trade is a better way, right? Not coercion. But I think just on data alone, half of the population in China will be gone in 25 years. They're just time out. There's not enough young people for the old people to have. And a society needs 2.1 kids per people to sustain itself, and China's having about 1. But the bigger problem is for 40 years, they had a one-child policy. And anyone who had the one child wanted boys because they wanted a boy to sustain it.
Bloodline.
They estimate millions of girls were just drowned right at the bedside because they didn't want the girls. They wanted the boys, right? And so now the country desperately needs 30-year-olds. But you can't just go get 30-year-olds. They can pay everyone $5 million per baby, but it doesn't help the situation that they're in.
Yeah.
And then how does China go get their energy? How does China go get their food?
So they're in a precarious position.
They don't have any navy. So
they have a small navy.
Less than 10% of their ships can go more than 1,000 miles.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And Japan has one of the most powerful navies in the world. Japan could easily send out a couple of warships in the Indian Ocean and block every single shipment in and out of China.
Huh.
The UK has a good navy. So the countries that have good navies could still go out and get supplies. China doesn't have a good navy.
So what do you think? Do you think China's fucked? Do you think China now relies on the West? Do you think that will lead to more cooperation?
Well, one, we know because of demographics, they kind of just start to disintegrate. So their debt level problems that they have, along with their demographic decline that they have, they're going to cease to exist as we know them. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. They don't have, and the same with Russia. So Russia also has a very aging population. So Peter Zion wrote a book 14 years ago saying that Russia would invade Ukraine by this year.
Really?
And the reason why he said by this year is because of their population decline or their demographic decline. And if they don't go now, they're going to be too old. They don't have enough young people.
They need to stop sending these young people to war and having them killed.
I agree. I'm not for war at all. I'm all for cooperation, not coercion. So I think the world kind of breaks up into these different regions where we kind of have like this Sweden centric. So there's like Sweden, Netherlands, Denmark, France, UK, Spain probably work together. And of course, like France, the UK, Spain, they have navies. And so like those countries kind of can work together. There's energy in the Black Sea. And so like there's like a region there. We have basically North and South America. So the US, Canada, Mexico, and South America kind of work together. So like all that manufacturing in China isn't really the manufacturing hub that it used to be. China's gotten too expensive. Now most of the manufacturing has gone to other parts of Asia. But in a world where we don't have just-in-time supply chains going and we don't have peace to ship and things like that, we have piracy and things like that happening, it would make much more sense to manufacture in Mexico and Central America, which will be probably cheaper than it will be to manufacture in Asia. So all that manufacturing that brought Asia online all comes back to Mexico, Central America, and maybe parts of South America.
Do you think we're heading to better times?
It depends on what you consider better. The answer is probably no. I think, and it depends on what you consider better. I think we've probably reached the peak of humanity for this cycle somewhere a decade ago.
Right.
Now it swings and it ebbs and flows and there's a pendulum and whatnot. But I think,
but we have a limited time alive, so we're going to live in the decline.
I think we'll live in the decline now,
and our children might live in the
one
decline.
one thing the United States has going for it is it's the most unique, God blessed piece of land in the world where we have all our own energy. We have the ability to do wind and solar. Most of the world doesn't have the ability to do wind and solar. That's a whole nother disaster. That's going to change the world, the energy makeup. But the U.S. we have all our own energy. We can grow all our own food. We have all the ingenuity, so we can design, create, and manufacture everything, and we can consume everything. So remember, China and Asia can manufacture things, but they can't buy it. Right? So the US and really North America and even South America, I think probably continues living pretty well. But even that, our quality of life will be impaired, right? So costs will go way up. So instead of having cheaper stuff made, we'll see massive inflation. So I think that this is some of the lowest inflation we'll see for the decade. A lot of people think that inflation's peaked. Inflation, it goes like this, right? But nothing goes up or down a straight line. But I think inflation goes up. The cost of manufacturing goes up, the cost of goods. I think we'll have less selection of goods. So all the foods that we're used to getting in the grocery store, we'll just have less selection.